What if the wisest Roman emperor had access to Notion? Imagine Marcus Aurelius tracking his virtues, battles with ego, and daily reflections, digitally. Here's what the ancient Stoic might have kept on his dashboard to conquer both the empire and himself. Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosopher, Roman emperor, and author of Meditations, spent his life mastering self-discipline, wisdom, and purpose. Self-reflection is daily armor, a quiet ritual that sharpens the mind before the world begins its noisy assault. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the dim light of Roman dawns, testing every impulse against reason the way a smith tests steel on an anvil. When he asked, "What is within my control?" he was not indulging in abstraction. He was fastening a breastplate that no spear of circumstance could pierce. Today, the siege weapons are different. Pings, deadlines, scrolling headlines. But the principle holds: the stronger the inner dialogue, the weaker the outer chaos. Waiting until crisis strikes to examine your thoughts is like forging armor in the middle of battle. The Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, imagining potential setbacks before they happen, does not invite gloom, it inoculates the psyche. 10 mindful breaths, a blank Notion page, or a pen scratching across cheap paper create a sanctuary where fears are tested against logic and desires weighed against values. You rehearse adversity so that when it arrives it feels familiar, almost mundane, and therefore endurable. The world may remain unpredictable, yet you meet it wearing something handcrafted perspective. Introspection also blunts the sharp edge of criticism. Without reflection, reproach slices straight into self-worth. With reflection, every remark is held to the light. Is it true? Is it useful? If yes, adapt. If no, discard without resentment. This interrogation turns a passive mirror into an active shield. The pause between stimulus and response becomes a command center where you choose an answer aligned with principle, not mood. Epictetus reminded students that events cannot harm us. Only our judgments about them can. Reflection is the workbench where judgments are forged to be light yet strong. Ego lurks on the battlefield too. Praise can inflate it until, like an over-pressurized boiler, it explodes at the first puncture of failure. Reflection lets the steam hiss out each evening. You note successes without clinging, record failures without catastrophizing, and discover an identity that is flexible yet resilient. Marcus asked whether fame would matter on his deathbed. Your modern version might be, will today's metrics matter in 10 years? The question deflates vanity with a single pinprick, letting purpose breathe. Reflection also turns time into a strategic ally. Days blur when unexamined. Examined, they become data for deliberate change. Track what energizes you, what drains you, where you slip into automatic scrolling. Patterns emerge, perhaps meetings after 3 p.m. erode patience, or sugar binges dull the morning. With these insights, you restructure the battlefield, move meetings, silence apps, plan meals, and the armor grows not only tougher but smarter. Some warn that too much introspection breeds paralysis, that danger arises from brooding, not reflecting. The Stoic loop ends with action: decide, commit, release. If guilt surfaces, translate it into a corrective step. If gratitude surfaces, express it. Then close the journal. The mind can rest because tomorrow's armor is already waiting on the rack. Self-reflection is democratic. No rank or fortune is required. Seneca wrote letters from exile. Viktor Frankl reflected in a concentration camp, and countless people journal today between double shifts. Circumstances limit resources, never introspection. 15 seconds of steady breathing at a red light can be a micro-audit. A nightly 3-line summary can steer a life's course. The materials are ordinary, but the outcome extraordinary. A person unshaken, not because life is gentle, but because their stance is firm. The armor is invisible, yet its strength is felt each time challenge meets serenity and falls away. Blunt, most people move through life checking off tasks, measuring productivity by how much gets done rather than how well it is done. But Marcus Aurelius would not have tracked his day by completed errands or email replies. He would have tracked his virtues: courage, temperance, justice, wisdom. Not because he wanted to be perfect, but because he wanted to be good. And to be good, he had to be deliberate. In the modern world, this mindset is more essential than ever. Tasks multiply endlessly. Notifications don't stop. You can easily spend your whole day reacting, completing, and appearing efficient, while completely neglecting the kind of person you are becoming. Virtue tracking is different. It isn't about volume, it's about depth. It's not about doing more, it's about being more. A checklist asks, what did I finish? A virtue log asks, who was I while I did it? There's a quiet discipline in that question, and a fierce honesty in the answers it demands. Did you practice patience in the meeting? Did you speak up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable? Did you resist the urge to boast, even when recognition was on the table? These moments are invisible on a traditional to-do list, but they are where character is built or lost. Marcus Aurelius would likely have kept a small space in his journal each day to reflect on these inner battles. Perhaps a column labeled temperance, scored from 1 to 5, or a short reflection under justice. Did I act fairly with others today, without bias or resentment? Unlike productivity metrics, which chase endless outputs, virtue tracking aims for inner alignment. You're not chasing achievement, you're aiming for integrity. This is not easy work, it's subtle. There are no medals for resisting a cruel thought, or for staying silent when gossip feels tempting. But these are the real victories of a Stoic. These are the moments that strengthen the soul. The Roman Empire Marcus ruled was vast and powerful, yet he understood that ruling himself was the greatest conquest. That's why he didn't list his imperial wins in his meditations. He listed his struggles with anger, ego, and distraction. He wasn't ashamed of these struggles. He saw them as daily exercises for virtue, the same way an athlete sees physical training. Today, tools like Notion or journals can help us with the same practice. A page titled Virtues can hold daily reflections. You can rate yourself, not as a form of judgment, but as a way of seeing clearly. Clarity, after all, is power. If you notice that you consistently score low in patience, that becomes an invitation to slow down, to breathe, to find where impatience arises. If you see that you're quick to speak but slow to listen, that's a call to humility. These insights build a kind of personal compass. Over time, you stop living on autopilot and start responding with intention. Virtue tracking also reshapes your goals. Instead of asking, did I win? Or did I get what I wanted? You start asking, did I act according to my values? That subtle shift changes how you define success. You stop chasing validation and start cultivating self-respect. You make fewer excuses. You recover from mistakes faster because you're not trying to be flawless. You're trying to be consistent. And in that consistency, virtue becomes not a rare effort, but a habit. Ultimately, tracking virtues is not about self-perfection. It's about self-commitment, a daily return to what matters, a reminder that every action, no matter how small, is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. In a world obsessed with performance, Marcus Aurelius would remind us character is the real measure. Tasks fade, titles pass, but virtue leaves a lasting imprint on your mind, your actions, and the world you quietly shape with them. Most people treat death as a distant rumor, the kind of news that only reaches other households. Marcus Aurelius rejected that illusion. Each morning he rehearsed the fact that a final sunset was guaranteed, its timing unknown. The practice, called memento mori, was no morbid indulgence, it was a clarifying lens. You wake differently when you remember that waking might cease. The trivial squabbles lose their acidic taste, the lingering fears shrink to scale, and the day ahead glows with provisional urgency. By greeting mortality at dawn, Marcus ensured that the hours ahead would be spent, not merely passed. In the modern age, the reminders of death are carefully air-brushed away. Hospitals hide behind frosted glass, social media celebrates youth, and algorithmic feeds churn out distractions potent enough to bury all existential discomfort. Yet the inevitability remains silent but undefeated. When you invite that inevitability into conscious thought, you reclaim agency. Deadlines stop being sources of anxiety and start becoming catalysts. You have limited pages left in your book. What story will fill them? The finite nature of the manuscript makes every sentence matter. Mortality does not diminish life, it intensifies it. Stoics distinguished between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. Knowing that we will die is universal. Using that knowledge to refine decisions is rare. Marcus used the thought of death to triage his priorities. If a task would not matter at the final reckoning, he questioned its place in the present. That filter is still useful. Scroll through another hour of curated envy, or call the friend you have not spoken to in years. argue to win a petty debate, or listen to understand. The presence of death in the room straightens the spine of choice. Memento mori also softens resentment. When you remember that every opponent shares your mortal sentence, hostility feels absurdly expensive. Marcus wrote that even the people who harm us will soon be reduced to ash, a name alone. Why poison the brief interval with hatred? By measuring grievances against the brevity of existence, he found forgiveness not sentimental but logical. The same arithmetic applies today. The stranger who cuts you off in traffic, the colleague who steals credit, the relative who dredges up old wounds. Each is a fellow passenger on a rapidly disappearing ride. Compassion becomes frugality with time. Paradoxically, death contemplation can foster daring. Fear of failure rests on the assumption that you will live long enough for embarrassment to matter. When you remember that the clock is indifferent, the cost of trying shrinks dramatically. Launch the business, learn the language, confess the love. Worst-case scenarios pale beside the certainty of the grave. Marcus marched into battle knowing each campaign could be his last. The awareness did not paralyze him, it galvanized him to act with conviction. Modern ventures seldom carry the same physical risk, yet they too require courage that only perspective can supply. Finally, remembering death protects gratitude from erosion. The ordinary cup of coffee becomes extraordinary because there may be a morning when your hands no longer lift it. The laugh shared across a kitchen table becomes precious because it might be the last echo. Marcus urged himself to take delight in the fragile present, and the directive still rings true. When you live with memento mori, sunsets look richer, conversations feel deeper, and even solitude acquires a sacred hush. Death ceases to be an ominous shadow and becomes instead a teacher, pointing relentlessly toward what makes life luminous. To remember death is to remember to live fully, urgently, tenderly, and with eyes unclouded by illusion. That awareness completes the circle. In an age of information overload, reading has become a passive activity for many. People scroll, skim, collect quotes, and hoard knowledge the way others collect souvenirs. Objects admired but rarely used. Marcus Aurelius would have approached reading differently. For him, reading was never about accumulation. It was about transformation. To read merely to know is to pile up facts, to decorate the mind with cleverness. But to read in order to grow is to change the way you think, the way you act, the way you live. That is what the Stoics valued, not erudition for prestige, but wisdom for action. When Marcus read Epictetus, he wasn't trying to sound philosophical at court. He was trying to survive the burden of power without letting it deform his soul. His reading was practical, like sharpening a blade before battle. Each lesson had to be internalized, tested against experience, and carried into the next challenge. That kind of reading doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you better. And better is harder. It requires humility. You have to be willing to admit that your current way of thinking is insufficient. You have to approach the text not as a judge but as a student. This kind of reading slows you down. You don't rush through pages looking for highlights. You pause after a sentence and ask yourself what it demands of you. If a line says, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself," you don't just nod. You examine your own behavior that day. Were you forgiving or defensive? Did you practice patience or indulge in judgment? The words become a mirror. Not a flattering one, but an honest one. Growth starts there, in that small discomfort. Reading to grow also means reading widely but deeply. You don't need to chase the newest titles. The Stoics believed in returning to the same works again and again. Wisdom is not something you extract in one pass. It reveals itself in layers. A passage you read a year ago may strike you differently today because you are different. Your life context has changed. Your struggles have changed. So the same line, once overlooked, now hits with the force of revelation. This is why Marcus kept rereading Epictetus, Seneca, and even his own journal. The goal wasn't novelty, it was mastery. Growth-based reading also encourages self-questioning. Instead of asking, "Do I agree with this?" you begin to ask, "What if this is true, and I've been wrong?" That's a vulnerable place to be, but it's the doorway to change. Reading this way strips away ego. It's not about winning arguments or sounding wise at dinner parties. It's about constructing a life that's in alignment with reason, virtue, and clarity. Marcus wasn't interested in appearing good. He was obsessed with being good, and every book he read was a tool in that effort. In today's world, the temptation to read for entertainment, for confirmation bias, or for social status is everywhere. But none of that leads to transformation. To read for growth is to make reading a spiritual discipline. You don't just read the book, you let the book read you. You let it challenge your impulses, expose your rationalizations, and inspire better habits. Over time, your bookshelf becomes a kind of map, a trail of intellectual landmarks that chart your evolution. Ultimately, Marcus Aurelius would remind us that knowledge alone is never enough. Plenty of intelligent people lead unexamined lives. What matters is whether the words you consume become choices you make, habits you build, and principles you live by. That's the Stoic way. That's what separates wisdom from trivia. And that's why you must read, not just to know but to grow. Ego is subtle. It rarely announces itself with arrogance or loud declarations. Instead, it hides in quiet moments. When you take offense too quickly, when you need to prove you're right, when praise feels like oxygen and criticism feels like suffocation. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. As the most powerful man in the world, his ego could have easily bloomed unchecked. But instead of feeding it, he questioned it. He wrote reminders to himself, "You're just a man. You are not your reputation, and you could die tomorrow." These weren't acts of self-punishment. They were acts of discipline. Ego, left unexamined, distorts perception and undermines wisdom. The Stoic knew that the greatest danger to a rational mind wasn't failure. It was the unchallenged sense of superiority. To check the ego is to recognize its presence in everyday thoughts. It's the part of you that takes too much pride in success and too much offense in failure. It's the voice that says you deserve special treatment, that others don't understand your value, that your intentions always excuse your actions. Ego inflates self-importance until reality becomes distorted, and when that illusion is inevitably punctured, by rejection, by adversity, by time, the pain is much greater than it needs to be. Marcus wrote as a remedy against this. He constantly reminded himself that he was part of something larger, that the universe was indifferent to titles and praise, and that all human beings are temporary flickers in time. This perspective doesn't erase the self, it puts it in proportion. Modern life gives ego endless fuel. Social media, job titles, public recognition, even well-meaning compliments can inflate the sense of self until it becomes brittle. You start building your identity around how others see you rather than what you truly value. The Stoics warned against this trap. They believed that the only stable foundation was internal: character, reason, virtue. Anything built on the opinions of others is vulnerable to collapse. So to check the ego is not to dismiss ambition or confidence. It's to separate self-worth from applause. You do what is right because it is right, not because it will be noticed. One of the most practical ways to check your ego is through honest reflection. When you make a mistake, do you accept responsibility or blame circumstances? When someone succeeds, do you feel joy or envy? These are small but powerful indicators. Marcus often reflected on how easily the mind invents excuses and narratives that protect the ego. He worked to dismantle those illusions. You can do the same. By pausing before reacting, by questioning your motives, by choosing silence over the need to win a conversation. Ego wants to be seen. Wisdom is comfortable being unseen. Ego also feeds on attachment to roles, achievements, outcomes. Marcus reminded himself that even emperors die, that legacies fade, and that the only thing you truly control is how you act in the present. By focusing on intention rather than result, you weaken the ego's grip. You don't need recognition to validate your work. You don't need victory to feel complete. You simply need to act with integrity and let the outcome be what it is. That level of detachment isn't weakness, it's freedom. When ego no longer holds you hostage, you move through life with less fear and more clarity. Checking the ego daily is a kind of hygiene for the soul. Just like you wouldn't leave your body unwashed, you shouldn't leave your mind unexamined. Every day, you sweep away pride, vanity, entitlement, things that accumulate quietly but weigh heavily. What remains is humility, resilience, and a quiet strength. Marcus Aurelius knew that ego was not a problem only for the arrogant. It's a problem for anyone who forgets that they are one part of a vast, an indifferent world. In remembering that, he found peace. And so can we. Journaling is often seen as a personal habit, something done in quiet moments to process emotions or record daily events. But for Marcus Aurelius, journaling was something more profound. It was a method of training the mind, a philosophical exercise, a conversation with the self. His meditations were not meant for anyone else to read. They were written as reminders, corrections, and clarifications. They served as a tool to strengthen his character and align his actions with Stoic principles. In the modern world, journaling remains one of the most powerful and accessible ways to bring clarity to chaos, to reconnect with purpose, and to observe the patterns of thought that either elevate or hinder us. To journal like Marcus is to sit down, not to record the events of the day like a historian, but to examine them like a philosopher. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? Which impulses did I resist and which ones ruled me? Was I driven by reason or emotion? These are not dramatic questions, but they are essential ones. They force a level of honesty that is difficult to escape. You cannot lie to the page and grow at the same time. Each entry becomes a mirror, sometimes flattering, often not, but always useful. Journaling builds self-awareness, and self-awareness builds resilience. When you understand your tendencies, you can begin to shape them. You notice, for instance, that impatience always shows up at the same time each day, perhaps in traffic, during a meeting, or while dealing with family. That awareness gives you a moment of pause. The next time impatience knocks, you recognize it, and instead of reacting automatically, you respond deliberately. That one small shift, repeated over time, becomes strength. The journal is where that transformation begins. Marcus used his writing to remind himself of what mattered most. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. A single sentence like that, written with intention, can shape the mood of an entire day. Journaling, when done consistently, becomes a dialogue between who you are and who you aspire to be. It holds you accountable, not through guilt, but through reflection. You begin to see that progress isn't about grand changes, but daily alignment. Were you just today? Were you disciplined? Were you kind, even when it was hard? The page waits without judgment, only asking for truth. In a world filled with distractions, journaling is one of the few practices that recenters your attention inward. Social media tells you to look outward, to compare, to perform, to impress. But the journal invites you to strip all that away, to forget the audience, to hear your own voice without noise. That kind of silence is rare and powerful. It's where clarity is born and where integrity is maintained. You don't need elaborate prompts or expensive notebooks to begin. You just need a willingness to meet yourself honestly. One line a day can be enough if it's honest. I was short-tempered today. I avoided discomfort and regret it. I did the right thing even when it was difficult. Over time, these small observations become a roadmap, a visible record of your inner evolution. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but the real empire he governed was himself. His journal was not decoration, it was discipline. It kept him grounded in the storm of politics, pressure, and power. Today, we face different storms: stress, noise, uncertainty. But the principle remains: the person who examines themselves regularly is harder to shake. Journaling doesn't make life easier, but it makes you steadier. And in a world that constantly pulls you outward, the ability to return inward is not just valuable, it's essential.